Hello, everyone. We will wait maybe another minute or two, and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We'll reward the early birds or the on-time birds for our discussion about the Creative Development Awards. Hi, everybody. I know I recognize some people that I know and a lot of newcomers, which is wonderful. My name's Janet Sarbah. I'm the head of creativity programs at the Heinz Endowments. And thank you, Southwestern Pennsylvania artists and supporters of Southwestern Pennsylvania artists, for being here today. We have all of you muted. I think we're going to have a number of additions to this session. So you're going to have to bear with having me talk at you for a little while about the program. And I'll give you just some of the ground rules of the webinar today. We are recording this because we want to have it available for folks who couldn't make it today to listen to this brief explication of the Creative Development Awards. And I want to acknowledge my colleague, Cindy Stuber from the Heinz Endowments, who give away. She is here to make sure that this webinar is successful and works. But also you should know that she's the person who knows the most about our relationship with SlideRoom, which is the online application format that we use for this program. So either today or she might be answering any questions between now and the submission date, which is August 17th, about anything that would happen with your SlideRoom submission. So we didn't require RSVP for this session, so we don't know how many people we're going to get up to, and therefore we're not going to have the ability to do sort of a formal introduction session for everybody. But I will ask that you'll be on mute for a good part of this webinar, listening to me talk about the program. And then I will take some time to answer questions. I don't know that we're going to need the whole time that was listed all the way from 2 to 3:30, because I know you don't want to listen to me drone on about the guidelines. But you can, I would suggest that for starters, if you have questions as we go along, put them in the chat. And when I get to the what I think is the end of my talking about the Creative Development Program. I'll go to the questions in the chat. I would ask that the questions be general questions about the guidelines. And there is an opportunity for you to pose very specific questions to me and to Cindy about your application between now and the deadline. You've probably seen in the guidelines that you can do that by sending an email to cda@hines.org. And we will do one of two things with the questions posed through CDA at hines.org. We will either be able to answer them pretty quickly through an email back to you, or you can schedule an office hours appointment with me and or Cindy if we can help with specific questions going along. And so you could just submit your request for an appointment or your specific question about your idea or your proposal to cda@hines.org. And Cindy and I will be on that no matter where in the world we are. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Creative Development Awards. This is the second year of the Creative Development Awards run solely by the Hines Endowments. Most of you are aware that there was a previous iteration of this program called Investing in Professional Artists that was run in conjunction with the Pittsburgh Foundation. Hines Endowments is running the Creative Development Awards now. And most of you probably know, because you all probably pay attention to what's happening in the world of individual artists funding in the region, that the Pittsburgh Foundation has had a wonderful program called Exposure Artists that they offered last year that I believe they're going to be offering again in 2023. So stay tuned for that. The good news there is that with the two programs at the two foundations, the amount of money for individual artists available for direct grants to individual artists has gone up. And I'm the first person to say, is it enough? No, it's not enough. That program, Investing in Professional Artists, went on for a little over a decade between the two foundations. There are other folks who have come into this space, but as all of you know probably better than I do, we need more resources for our individual artists. We say in the guidelines for this program that our artists are the key definers, the interpreters, the critics of what's going on in our world and in our region. That's never been more true than now. And even pre-pandemic, we had data on what was happening with our individual artists in the region, courtesy of the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council and other national data. What is median income? How do people make a living? We know that the median income isn't where it should be. The amount of resources aren't what they should be. I would like to hope that on the part of foundations like the Hines Endowments, individuals and other contributors to the arts, that we start working on increasing the amount of our resources that go directly to individual artists, although that is, it's a little bit more difficult thing for foundations to do. So I'm not going to stay on a soapbox about why funding individual artists are important. Most of you, all of you know that and understand it in your gut already. And the, debating and discussing the question about how we build more support for individual artists in the region is a subject for another conversation. And perhaps there is a demand and an appetite for that kind of debate in another forum at some point. I'd welcome if people are interested in the opportunity to do that, discussing that to do something like that with the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council as well. But we even know pre-pandemic, and especially during the pandemic, and I guess you could say we're post-pandemic now, the need for recognition dollars for our artists is even more urgent now. So let me say a little bit, a general background about the Creative Development Awards. You've probably all seen the guidelines, but you know what the intent is. So you know what the intent is there. The intent is general creative development funding for artists, career advancement. In the case of the residencies piece, creative partnerships between organizations and artists. And in general, to increase the visibility of working artists in the Pittsburgh region. And by the Pittsburgh region, we define it as 13 counties in southwestern Pennsylvania that are listed in our guidelines. Right now, the program is restricted to individuals and organizations in that 13 county region. The program has two components. And for 2022, we have about $330,000 to give away. And I'm looking at Cindy just to see if I'm in the right ballpark there. Okay, she's giving me the thumbs up. I was going to say 350, but it's a little bit less than that. We have 330,000 to give to artists. There are two, and as I said, there are two different components. The first component is $20,000 grants, direct grants to artists at any career stage. And the second track is residencies at local cultural institutions. We provide a definition of what a cultural institution is in our guidelines to host local, national, or international artists or arts administration in an immersive residency. And I'll say more later about what we would consider to be an immersive residency. Excuse me. So let me say a little bit about the largest component, which is the Creative Development Awards direct grants to artists. These grants were designed as a kind of a hybrid on purpose. They're not awards per se. They're not, for example, an honorific, which simply recognizes past achievements of artists. Rather, well, and neither are they for a finished product. You don't have to have a finished work or a finished production as a result of these grants. But what they're meant to do is to contribute in some meaningful way to artistic or career development. Artists at any career level can apply for these grants. And we do use peer panels to review all the submissions. Every year that we've done this program, we've received probably between 100 and 150 applications from artists in the region. And so, and it's really important because these programs are so competitive, and because, as I said at the beginning, we need more of these programs, but we don't have them now, and therefore they're awfully competitive. So we really feel an obligation for everyone's proposal to get as many eyes on it as we possibly can during the review process. So we have a two-step review process. We first have a panel of local screeners, local peers who review all the proposals and recommend about 30 to 35 finalists. And then we take those 30 to 35 finalists to a national panel of reviewers who select the actual recipients of the funding. We do publish the names of the reviewers when the awards are announced, both the local and national reviewers. And we ask them, and this is something that we really want to work on in this round, because we really take the feedback from all the applicants to heart and from the panelists themselves, is that we really need to capture the comments of the reviewers from the very beginning of the process and feed them back to the applicants as best we can. I think we can really improve on the how we've done this before. We have captured some comments, but for those 50 or so applicants or more who might not be recommended to the final round. Feedback is incredibly important. I don't need to tell anybody that. And so we're going to do our best to improve that part of our review process. What do the reviewers look for? They have certain criteria that they're asked to consider, but by far the most important criteria is their review of your body of work. That's the most heavily weighted criteria. There's some intention they're asked to give feedback about the feasibility of what's proposed, but by far their understanding of your body of work and your statement about how your project or your process will impact your career trajectory and or your artistic growth is the biggest thing that people are looking for. And I also know that, and if I were an artist, I would feel the same way. I believe people have a real love-hate relationship with the notion of being asked to write an artist statement. Suppose your art form doesn't lend itself to being translated into the written word, then writing an artist statement may not be the most fair thing to ask you to do. But I guess in some ways there's not a better way right now to juxtapose an artist statement with your body of work and to get a real sense about what it is you want to make and to do in the world with your work. So those are really the most important components of what will be in folks' proposals. And in fact, after the last round of the first round of the Hines Endowment's doing this last year, I spent a lot of time interacting with applicants, and after the fact, interacting with applicants who hadn't been funded, who wanted to say, "Can I talk to you about an artist statement?" And here's what I think about artist statements. How can the foundation take that into consideration going forward? And or, hey, look at this artist statement. Do you think it compellingly talks about what I want to work on? So I know that is always a sensitive subject, but I do think it's a really important subject. And please interact with us about what happens in that artistic statement. We also ask in our application for you to submit a budget for your project. And I think we have well-researched budget in there. What does that mean? What does it mean if we're asking for a well-researched budget and yet we're saying you don't have to have a fully realized project? In other words, there doesn't have to be a culminating performance or exhibit of any kind. So what constitutes a well-researched budget? And I guess the answer to that is that if you make a compelling case that your artistic goals and career advancement will be advanced by whatever you're proposing, it can be a very broad-based budget. We learned from earlier years with the Pittsburgh Foundation and the Investing in Professional Artists that some artists should be building childcare into the budgets for their submission. Some artists should want to build in travel simply to see work. A great many artists wanted to use funding to buy materials or to pay collaborators to experiment with work. And all those things should qualify if you have a compelling case. One artist that we funded last year said the most important thing for her to advance her work was to get, so to speak, a room of her own, to build a studio where she had not had a real studio before. And on the basis of her work sample and her proposal, she received funding to create her own studio space for herself, I think for the first time in her life. One of the other things that we've noticed and that I've noticed over time and looking at artists building budgets is they're not kind enough to themselves. If they're wanting to work with collaborators or they're wanting to buy materials for themselves and or others to work with, sometimes they don't build in enough funding for themselves, simply to purchase their own creative time, buy their own creative time to free up time, either from a teaching obligation or some other kind of obligation. And that is a very valid thing to put in your budget for your creative development proposal. Again, it depends on what our reviewers feel about the body of work that you've submitted. There are some very particular things in the proposal, in the application, about what you can submit on into SlideRoom. And I'll have to defer to Cindy if there are any questions, specific questions about the content of the work. We make it a point, and we're going to stress it this year, that we need the panelists to spend the bulk of their time looking at work. And if we have over 100 or up to 150 proposals this time, it's important for you to tell us, if the panelists don't have a lot of time, what should they look at first? Like, if you're queuing up a video, is there a point where you want them to start watching? Or if they don't have the time to look at all the work samples you submitted, where do you want them to start looking? That's important too. Please take that to heart about the work samples, because really the work samples are the most important part of your application. So that's the basics of the Creative Development Awards requests. Now, the second component is residencies. The residencies are up to $35,000. And one of the things that we did this year, we don't, in previous years, we didn't suggest a balance or a specific guideline about how many direct grants to artists and how many residencies we were going to fund. One of the things that I noticed last year is that we got a great many competitive residency proposals, and our panelists recommended a much larger number of residency proposals than they had in previous years, which is good and fine. And we had a big debate among the panelists and among some of the artists about whether we should look at capping the number of residencies, because for some artists, a residency opportunity at a strong cultural institution is going to be one of the greatest career advancements that they could have. But what we decided to do, at least for this year, is to, with apologies to the cultural institutions on this call, is to expect to limit the number of residencies to 3 this year. If we only have $330,000, and we really want to try to privilege direct grants to individual artists, then we're going to go into this round thinking that we may cap the number of residencies at 3. And I'm not making a hard and fast determination about that, because suppose we get earth-changing residency proposals. But I do want to signal that I'm interested and concerned about that, because as I said at the beginning, there's so few opportunities regionally for individual artists. And it's taken many years for the Heinz endowments to get to the place of making direct grants to artists. So that's something to take in consideration this year about the residency programs. there's a couple of key things about the residencies that I would stress. Unlike the Creative Development Awards, in which an artist must be resident in one of the 13 counties that we fund, the residency artists are not required to be local. I think in point of fact, last year's residencies, about half were local and half were national or international. But the residencies are a chance for a creative institution in the region to bring in someone from the outside to really infuse new thinking and new ideas into their organization and into regional thinking. So it does not have to be, the residencies do not have to be local artists. The key competitive fact for the residencies is that the residencies should be immersive. And what do I mean by immersive? This year, we extended the minimum time for a residency. It used to be shorter, but now the residencies we ask that the residencies be from a minimum of 6 months to a maximum of 18 months. And that the residencies really need to show that the institution and the artist are directly benefiting. If it's simply, and the constituencies that the institution serves also. So, that's a real consideration. We also ask with the residencies to make sure that a sponsoring institution doesn't consume too much of the resources, that for a residency proposal, 2/3 of the residency costs have to be devoted to artistic costs. And that might be materials, that might be a stipend to the artist. But that's pretty strictly enforced, so that even though by rights the sponsoring institution should receive some of the funding, that the bulk of the funding is flowing to the artist in residence and to activities supporting the artist in residence. One of the last things I'll say is that you can get a sense of what was done in the first year of the program by going to the Heinz Endowment's website, and under the news tab, you can look at the press release that detailed who the 2021 recipients were and who the panelists were, both the local and national, just to get a sense of who's been looking at these before, and what kinds of folks we're asking to be our reviewers. And we always release those after we make our awards. And my hope is that going forward, we can also begin to do more to promote the visibility of our artists. Last year, we did get some good publicity for the artists and the residencies that were supported. I think we probably can do more in that regard, and would welcome your suggestions and ideas about how we should do that going forward. I'm going to ask, that is a basic review of the components of the program. And I'm going to look at Cindy and ask her if she thinks there's anything that I missed in terms of going over. You've been listening to me talk, all of you, for 30 minutes now. And that's probably your limit, and it might be my limit too. So I would just, Cindy, can you think of anything that I haven't touched on that in terms of a general overview of the program that I need to touch on?
No, Janet, I think you've touched on everything. I just wanted to mention in the guidelines, the maximum request for individual artist proposals is $20,000, And for residencies, the maximum request is 35,000. And Janet and I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. If you have any questions, go through the CDA email link that's on our website. And please feel free to reach out. Jan and I are both going to be out on vacation next week, so we'll get back to you. We'll both be checking our emails. So, we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can.
I'm going to be on a vacation, but I'm not going to be on a vacation from the Creative Development Awards. So I'm going to be responding to the NECDA emails every day because, the deadline is, I guess, 5 weeks away, 6 weeks away, 5 weeks away. I should be the number one person remembering that. But it's really important to get back to you either with office hours or questions over that time. And I know sometimes these webinars can be a little bit deadly talking heads. As I'm talking here about the guidelines, one of the things that I wished I had done that maybe I'll do for next year, if I'm so fortunate to be running this program next year, which is a question, is to have one or two of the artists who received funding in the previous year to come on. Yes, Sadell's giving me a heads up on that. I wish I had thought to do that. And, just have some of them talk about how they put their proposals together. The next best thing is for you to go and look at the press release that we did last year. I promise I'll do that, I'll recommend that be done, because it's so much better to hear from the applicants themselves, or maybe even two applicants who were successful, an applicant who wasn't successful, if I could talk anybody into doing that, and talk about the process and how it was for them in applying. But that's what happens when you're required to talk about something. Another idea will come into your head that you should have done. But we will do that next year for sure. So I am very happy to take questions in the chat. And as I said at the top, I don't know why we build this as 2 to 3:30. Maybe we thought we were going to get a tsunami of questions. And if we don't get a tsunami of questions, that is okay. This session is over when it's over, so to speak. It can be 45 minutes long or 30 minutes long or whatever. And questions may come to you, but we've tried to set it up as this to be a time when everybody could hear at one time the very basics of the program, and then reach out to us individually. And we're really going to make an effort this year to be as accessible as possible by email or Zoom. If anyone has any questions from now till the time. And Cindy, this morning, there's about 35 proposals that are started. Okay, here's one question from Freddie Bainbridge. Hi, how are you? Whatever that artwork is in the back, I like it. That's cool. Saying, I'm a creative and not great at tech. Can you talk a bit about the simplest ways to send pics, typed information or such? So are you a visual artist? Yeah, so that's what I figured. Cindy, do you want to say something about this? I think, Freddie, have you looked at the what we say in the guidelines about how to upload stuff? Cindy, has anybody ever had problems uploading files?
No, we actually don't restrict the type of files. You're only allowed to upload, I believe the maximum is 5 files. So we ask that you choose the best representation of your work to include. If there's ever any problem, I I believe last year someone had an issue. They emailed me whatever they wanted to include, and I was able, since I'm an administrator of the slide room account, I was able to manipulate and get that the correct
Okay.
the MP3 or whatever the problem was. So, you know, I can go in the back room and fix things.
You know what? That's a really good question. Will they look at your website since it has 100 pieces of, and for instance, there's a lot of work there. I'm going to encourage the panelists this year, particularly the national ones, to go to people's websites and take a look at them. Sometimes what we've experienced is because they're looking at so much work, sometimes they will simply look at the work samples that you submitted and not go to your website. So if you have a great deal of work on your website, I would say figure out a way to package those works that you want people most to see. And I don't know whether that is in a zip file or that you can upload to, you can tell from the way I'm talking that I ain't a tech person either. So the great news is that if you can't figure out how to package the work in a zip file or some other form that you can upload it directly in Slide Room, Cindy is willing to help figure out whether we on our end at the endowments, or even with the help of our IT people, can figure out a way to package it so that it can get to them. But they probably won't look at it.
Slide Room does have a help desk that's available all the time. So if you have any trouble with uploading, I would suggest contacting them first, since they're the experts on, the attachments and all that stuff. I would go to them first, and they're very easy to deal with and very responsive to any requests.
Mhm. For media artists, particularly, we've tried really hard to work with as many different formats as possible to accommodate that. So we're trying to be really user-friendly on Slide Room. Let's see, Emily has a good question. Does a residency mean that I have to be at a place all the time? I have a studio in my house. And so we do say in the guideline, P.S. Freddie, you have a fan. That's great. And that's a good question. An immersive residency that's 6 months to 18 months, and sometimes the artists don't reside here. You do not have to be at the place all the time. You definitely do not. You would figure out though, what kind of relationship do you want to have to the sponsoring arts organization where you're going to be in residence, and how can you make a most meaningful contribution for your own work and their work. Often what's happened in these residencies is, for instance, a visual artist who wanted to experiment in their career with the glass form was in residence at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. So they definitely weren't there all the time, but they had an immersive period of learning how to work in glass and how to transfer their creative vision into a different form. There have been, I'm trying to think of what some other residencies have been. There is a craft artist this year, Tarane Adea, who some of you may know, who was selected for a residency at the Society for Contemporary Craft. And her work is craft-based. And so she's spending time with them on developing her own work and also, I think, helping them curate. So it definitely does not don't need to be there all the time. But I see your question is, am I expected to go somewhere? The residency would be for a local, national, or international artist to be in residence at a cultural organization in one of the 13 counties that we named there. And there are a couple of paragraphs in the guidelines which are important to look at in defining what do we mean by a professional artist? What do we mean by an arts organization? And what do we mean by a residency? And I should have mentioned this before. This opportunity is for professional artists, so it's not for students, but we define professional artists very broadly in terms of, a commitment to a practice and the creation of a body of work and formal or informal training in a field. So that's a little bit about, and we talk about, the reason I brought up the definitions is that we talk about what kind of organization is eligible for a residency. We usually, the first thing that you think of when you think about an arts residency is at a traditional cultural institution, such as a gallery or other visual arts institution, or with a dance or theater company, or with a music organization, etc. But there's also leeway there in terms of a historical society, an environmental organization. If you can demonstrate as the sponsoring organization that you've got a track record of some kind in working with creative individuals or artists to further your organizational mission, you could also apply. And if you're not a traditional arts organization and you're on this call, I would suggest, just reaching out to us and saying, not a traditionally defined cultural or arts organization, but we're interested in this. And here's what we think our credentials are that would qualify us to apply. And we would definitely look at that. And so I see a question from Gregory Williams too. Hi, Gregory. It's nice to see you, and tell your brother I said hello too. This is a little bit of a sore point. So Gregory asks if you've received an Investing in Professional Artist grant before, can you apply to this program? And right now we're saying, no, you can't. Only because we want to give more opportunities to people who haven't gotten grants before. This has been a sensitive subject, and I said last year that we would take it year by year and consider it. I think we're still going to take it year by year. I think we should consider lifting that restriction over the next year or two. But because this is so competitive and because we want new voices to come in, we're reluctantly saying, if you've gotten one before, an individual artist. Oh, wait a minute. Your question is about a residency.
Yes.
If you got a creative development award, you could be part of a residency proposal. You could be part of a residency proposal. That is different.
Okay. Can I just get a little
clarified?
All right. So I received an individual artist award years ago. I am working with an organization to create a residency. And then that organization will apply, but I will be the resident in that application. Will that be problematic or no?
No, you can do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's my brother. I said hi. Hey.
Please tell him. Sorry,
right.
Everybody, but
yeah.
Those Creative Williams brothers are cool. Emily wants to know, would paying somebody to update my website count as a budget item? That is interesting. Yes, it would. We had a proposal this last year from an artist who wanted to use social media in a creative way to promote their work. I don't think I've ever been in a panel where there was so much conversation about whether it was an eligible request. And it was a request that was recommended to the final round. I think in the digital world that we live in now, where not only in terms of making work, but in terms of promoting yourself, on your media presence, your digital presence is so important. I think the panelists felt that, you know, if the quality of the work was great, that is, Emily's giving me a heart, that is something that that would be considered. Yep. And you haven't lost your sight because you haven't had time, because you want to make work. Yeah. So let's see. Freddie has another question. How long can you take off during the building of an application on and off? How long can you take off? Do you mean return, like starting it and then returning to it? Yeah. Cindy, you have to help me with that one, but I'm pretty sure that you can start your application and then just keep returning to it.
Yeah, as long as it's, you have until the deadline of August 17th at midnight to submit the application. There are, I don't know how many applications in progress right now. You just go in and you work on it, you save it, and then you just keep going back until you're ready to submit it. So you can work on, you know, if you've already started it, you've got until midnight on August 17th to submit it. If you don't submit it by the deadline, then it's gone.
Yeah, this is one of those grant programs where I think what Slide Room does at 12 midnight on the 18th, you can no longer submit, right? Okay, so don't let that happen. I know it's a real temptation. And I have this, I know that I think what I would be doing too is it would be 11:30 p.m. and I would still be fiddling with what I was writing.
I was just afraid
so
lose everything I did last week, kind of thing.
Yeah. I would think one of the hardest things is if, you know, looking at your body of work and thinking, okay, if there's a group of people that are going to have a very short window of time to look at my work, what do I want them to look at? And that's, you know, one of the most important parts of the application. And sometimes if you wait till the last minute, you might have difficulties in uploading the work. So don't let that happen. And Kristen Helfrich, hello, has a good question from a residency sponsor. So she's asking, can we submit a residency and then the artist maybe submits a creative development award separately? We did have that happen last year, didn't we, Cindy? We had a residency and a creative development proposal. We did allow it. And we did allow the panelists to decide which was the stronger proposal. I really would suggest that it's, you know, it's confusing if the residency proposal and the creative development proposal are for the same thing. I think that's very confusing for a panel. Emily, are the two projects envisioned to be different things? Let's see, how long a time limit? Oh, over 3 years. Right now, we say that there's a time limit on the residencies of a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 18 months. This is why, you know, discussing grants programs in real time gets you into trouble. I think that the maximum is the minimum of 6 months is a hard minimum. I think I would be personally open to, if you had a compelling case that it was a residency that needed to go beyond 18 months, I personally would say that sounds like a pretty immersive experience, and it would be interesting to hear what you had planned there. So I realize what I'm doing is what you're not supposed to do, which is to say the printed guidelines, I'm going beyond the printed guidelines. But I think if you were to make a compelling case and say, I see that the guidelines say a maximum of 18 months, I ask you to consider because of the uniqueness of this artist and this organization, that it would suit our needs to be 3 years, and we can consider that. I hope that helps, Emily. Oh, you didn't mean residencies. Okay. A proposal around a show in another state. That is perfectly fine. That is perfectly fine. Yes. Oh, business costs. If you mapped out business costs for 3 years, could you submit that as your budget? I don't see why not. I don't see why not. Yep. And you can hold me to it too. If somebody asks you that question after you submit it, you can say, that's what Janet said. Yes, yes. All right. Okay. Going once and going twice. Other questions? You're welcome. And I want to thank, nobody is required to even show their face on camera or say anything. I just appreciate everybody showing up and being interested in the creative development program. I hope we've made it really clear that you know where to find us, and you've met us, you've seen us now. And I hope we've really communicated to everybody that we want to be as accessible as possible from now till the proposal deadline and after that. So don't hesitate to hit cda@hines.org, and you'll get one or the other or both of us coming back at you. All right then, and thanks everybody. And this recording, Cindy, will it be found hopefully, because you talk about tech challenge, this is the first time that we've done this. This will be on our website.
God willing, it will be once it has been recorded and saved. I am planning to send it to communications, and communications will upload it to the CDA link on our website, God willing.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, again, everybody that even we didn't see or hear from, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your good wishes in the chat, and be in touch with us. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.